basically what we're looking at today would look at the vocabulary. What are the main terms? Would look at the ISMS family of standards. Would also see why the ISO 27001 is so popular, and then we'll of implementing the ISMS, and then also we'll see a survey. I'll just talk about the survey, and then we'll look at this, after which we'll look at what activities are required. Then we have what we call the Annex A controls. We'll look at that, and then other things that we need to know about the ISMS, and we'll look at the implementation and the first steps. So, who can implement the ISO 27001? First of all, the ISO 27001 is the ISMS standard, which means Information Security Management Systems. So every kind of organization, every type and every size of organization that collects, processes, stores, or transmits information. And then every organization that recognizes that information and its related processes, systems, networks, and people are important assets when it comes to achieving the organizational objectives. And any organization that faces a range of risks that can affect their functioning or the functioning of their assets. And then anyone that would want to address their perceived risk exposure by implementing information security controls. Now, information security sits on three core areas, which would call that the CIA triad. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when we say confidentiality is basically...
Sorry, Mo, I don't know if your slide is moving, but it's not moving from my handle.
Please, is it the same for every other person?
Yes, I was raising up my hand.
Yes.
Okay, let me stop sharing and we share again.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
It's moving now.
I think it has moved now.
Okay, I think I know what the problem is. I'd have to share my full screen. So let me do that instead. Sorry. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Fantastic.
So confidentiality is just to ensure that the information is made available to only authorized individuals, or to authorized processes, or to authorized entities. And then availability is making sure that there's accessibility and usability of the assets when it is needed, And then integrity is to make sure that the your asset or your information asset is complete and accurate. With integrity, I give a little analogy. If I say, tell Moses to meet me by 10 a.m. at the bus park, and you come and say, Daniel said Moses should meet him at 10 a.m. Is it accurate? Yes. But is it complete? No, because he didn't say where. But if he says, Daniel said Moses should meet him at 11 a.m. at the bus park, is it complete? Yes. But is it accurate? No. So that's what integrity of information is. So, what is an ISMS? Which is the Information Security Management System. It's a systematic approach that we use to establish, to implement, to operate, to monitor, to review, to maintain, and to improve an organization's information security posture to help them achieve business objectives. So, what are the components of an ISMS? within an ISMS, you'd have policies, you'd have defined roles and responsibilities, you'd have documented information, and then you'd have things like your information security risk assessment. And then after doing the risk assessment, you have to have your risk treatment. How do you treat the risks that have been identified during the assessment? And then you'd have to identify or determine what controls would be in place to mitigate those risks. So you also have management processes which are related to how policies are established. Awareness is a big deal. And then you have to provide competency, either by training people or bringing in people with expertise. And then you have to plan properly, because after planning, you cannot implement without proper planning. And then after planning, you go into the implementation, which after you implement, you now operate what has been implemented. While then after operating what has been implemented, you have to assess its performance to see if it is performing optimally or not. And then in the end, management would also review what has been implemented, and after necessary assessments. And then after the review, if it needs to be tweaked or changed or improved on, then that is where what we do in the improvement phase. So because the ISO 27001 is a risk-based, it uses a risk-based approach, we need to understand what risk is. So basically, what is risk? So risk is the effect of uncertainties on objectives. So risk, how is risk expressed? You know, so it's expressed in terms of a combination of consequences of an event and the associated likelihood of. So now, if a event happens, what would be the consequence? What would be the effect on your infrastructure or on your operations? And then number two, what are the chances that that thing would occur? What is the likelihood of its occurrence? So that is what it is. It's talking about the consequence if, or the impact, you could use the word impact too, if that thing happens, and what is the likelihood that that risk could actually rear its head. And then risk is also associated with the potential threats. So a threat cannot act without a vulnerability. So I'll give an instance. You go to sleep with your door open. The threat is the possible thief passing, but the vulnerability is that your door was open. So if the door wasn't open, if it was properly secure, the chances of that threat actor gaining access and doing what he wants to do would be very slim. So basically, that is it. And we know that threats, after they've exploited a vulnerability, they are going to cause harm, most likely. So also, as I had said before, that it is the ISMS is based on, a risk approach. So risk assessment, because when you do risk assessment, you now know what risk you'd accept, what risk you'd mitigate, what risk you transfer. So you have to analyze the requirements so that you can have a proper picture and then know how to protect your infrastructure or your operations properly, and then you know which controls to put in place so that there can be a proper or an effective information security management program. So what's the primary benefit of implementing an ISMS? Basically, it's just to reduce information security risk. So reducing the probability that those things would occur. Like I tell people, this is just like poverty. Risk is like poverty. Poverty cannot be eradicated. It can only be reduced to the barest minimum. So you can do that with risk to a point where the possible risk that could happen could be some that you could accept. Maybe the impact is not as grievous. So We have other standards for, the information security management systems, but the ISO 27001 is, I dare to say, possibly the most commonly used around. So now the ISO 27001 belongs to the ISO 27000 family. So when we say the ISO 27000 family, there are over 70 standards in that family. Like for instance, you see 27000. 27000 just talks about the vocabulary of information security. Then we have the requirements, requirement standards. For instance, we have the ISO 27001, 27006, 27009. Then you have guidelines. Like in ISO 27001, we hear about Annex A controls, but those controls are actually, so those controls are now expatiated in the ISO 27002. Now, in the ISO 27002, it kind of guides us on how to implement those controls that we would see in the Annex A of ISO 27001. And then we have sector-specific guidelines across, say, telecoms or different sectors of, the economy. So this is what the ISO 27000 standard looks like. And basically, this is just an overview and vocabulary. So it just covers commonly used terms and definitions in the ISMS family of standards. Basically, so that is what this does. Then we have the ISMS 27001, which is the focus of today. We have the most recent one, which is the 2022 edition. It's called Information Security, Cybersecurity and Privacy Protection, Information Security Management Systems Requirements. So basically, this standard, it just specifies the requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving an information security management system within the context of the organization that is implementing it. Then we have, like I'd said before, the 27002, so it's just the reference for the generic information security controls. In ISO 27001, we have 93 controls. So this just expatiates on how to implement those controls. Then this is guidance on the requirements for information security management system. So just this is for risk, information security risk. All this 27701 is privacy, so those are just some popular ones. So why is the ISMS so popular? I'm sure we ask ourselves that question from time to time. And that's because, number one, it's applicable to all organizations. It doesn't matter what kind of business they organize, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether they are making wigs, whether they are in oil, regardless of the sector of the organization, regardless of the size and the nature of the organization, you can implement information security management systems. And then it is actually short, and very simple to comprehend. So the standard itself has 21 pages. I mean, you have the clauses and you have the controls stated in those 21 pages. And then also you can align it with other management systems. For instance, quality management systems, business continuity management systems, with privacy, all of that. And it's time tested. So it didn't just show up. It started off as the BS 7799-1 in 95. Then in 2005, that was when we had the first version of the ISO 27001 2005. That's when it was first of all called ISO 27001. Then we have the 2013 version, and then now we have the 2022 version. Now, why do these versions keep updating? For instance, in the 2022 version, we have an incorporation of things like cybersecurity, for instance. Don't forget that as at 2005, that had not reached the kind of maturity level we're seeing now. I'm seeing, so who knows? I mean, before the AI management systems came out, I envisaged that, which I still do, that probably in the next revision of the ISO 27001, we'll probably see aspects of AI there, because that is what is, I mean, there's a lot of it in use right now, and it needs protection too, or it needs proper security too. So it contains simple but valuable principles, things like understanding the needs, and the expectations of interested parties. When we say interested parties, from staff to investors to regulators, then we have things like process approach and all of that. And then you can find many additional recommendations, guidelines and courses. So resources around ISO 27001 is not scarce. And then you can also certify your ISMS. So in the 27,000 family, the ISO 27001 is the only standard that an organization can certify to. And then many other IS standards and frameworks are inspired by ISO 27001. So a lot of other information security standards and frameworks kind of bite off ISO 27001. And many information security professionals use this standard so that the same language can be spoken. There's no disparity or disconnect anywhere. So what are some of the benefits of implementing the information security management systems? I mean, you will generally improve the posture of your security, within your organization. Things like incident response and cyber resilience. It helps with that. And then it raises awareness and your information security culture. So that means you have better information security hygiene within the organization. And then it reduces business risks, because when you put things in place, the chances of threat actors being successful, beyond threat actors, even people doing things out of ignorance or lack of know-how, it will be slim. And then it helps you to build stakeholder trust. So that is why you see a bank would have certain certifications, including the ISO 27001. It gives customers, regulators, some form of confidence that to a great degree, this bank knows what they're doing, or this organization is safe. And then legal, regulatory, and contractual compliance. So it depends on, sometimes you're doing a business and your the people you're doing business with would say, for instance, I know that there's a level of partnership with Microsoft as a company that you need to have things like ISO 27001, your data protection certification in place. And then it's a common approach to compliance with different information security requirements. Then also, it increases the maturity of related processes. So even around governance, around IT, around HR, around procurement, it increases, the maturity of those processes. And then it increases transparency and justification of security budgets. So you would see what needs to be done. And then also marketing opportunities. If you're going to do business, would you rather do business with a company that is certified, or a company that is not certified? Sorry, please, before I go on, please confirm you can still see my screen and you can hear me.
Yes, I can see your screen and I can hear you.
Yes, from you as well.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. So, how do you implement an ISMS? There are different phases to it. We'll just do like a high-level overview here. So, you first of all have to understand the organization's needs and why it is necessary to establish the information security policy and the security objectives. So there must be an information security policy, there must be objectives, because you cannot go in blinded, And then also, you have to assess the organization's risks related to information security. So a risk assessment, an information security risk assessment would need to be done. And then there's implementing and operating information security processes, controls, and other measures to treat risks. So when those risks are identified, you have to implement certain processes, put certain controls in place, and take certain measures so that those risks can be treated. And then you have the place of monitoring and reviewing the performance and effectiveness of the ISMS. So after implementation, you have to monitor and review. Now, one of the ways to do that, we have things like internal audits, and continuous review. And then after you do those reviews, you get the areas, they are called them OFIs, opportunities for improvement. Then you put those improvements in place, and that is what we call continual improvement. So what are the required activities, around ISO 27001 and its implementation? So before we go on, we have what we call clauses. Every ISO has basically 10 clauses, but you cannot, the first, 3 are not, when you're doing the more in-depth course, that would be told to you properly. The first 3 are not auditable. They are just for reference sake. But from clauses 4 to 10, that is what you use to implement. So clause 4 is the context of the organization. So you have to first of all understand the context of understand the organization and its context. Then you now understand the needs and expectations of interested parties. That means you have to determine who the interested parties are. That is relevant to your ISMS, and what their requirements are, or how the relevance to information security. And then you have to determine the scope of the information security management system. How deep, how wide. In some organizations, ISMSs are, they only are affected for certain units, certain processes, certain procedures, while in some organizations, it would be company-wide. It just depends on the operations of the organization. So I know an organization where their ISMS is in full implementation. That's the scope at the head office, but the regional offices are not particularly within scope of the ISMS. So after which, after determining the scope, then you establish and implement and maintain and continually improve your information security management system. So number 5 is leadership. No ISMS or no implementation can be successful without top management's commitment. And how do they commit? You have things like management review meetings. You have communiques from management making people fall in line. You have policies being put in place, and then management appointing people to related roles and giving them the authorities they need to carry out their activities. Clause 6 is around planning. So in clause 6, you look at, it addresses the actions to address risks and opportunities. Like we have said, when we see the risk, then what are the opportunities for improvement? And then also the information security objectives and planning to achieve them. How do you achieve those objectives, and then how do you plan for changes? Then we have support as clause 7. So around support, the organization will have to determine the resources that are needed, would have to determine the competencies that these resources would need to have, and then awareness. Now, there must be proper awareness within the organization. You cannot have a policy and it's not properly distributed. People don't even know what the policy says. People don't even know their own roles, their responsibilities within the running of the ISMS. So that is what awareness takes care of. Now, there must be proper communication, whether internal or external, related to the information security management system. And then I had a boss that used to say, if it's not documented, it doesn't exist. So information has to be documented. So you have different things that need to be documented: processes, procedures, worksheets, all of that. And then operations is clause 8. So operational planning and control. So you have to, as an organization, plan and implement, the controls and all of that. And then information security risk assessment. So there must be a risk assessment performed, and it has to be documented. And then after the risk assessment is performed, you must come up with your risk treatment. And then we have performance evaluation for clause 9. So that means it is at this point we monitor, we measure, and we analyze, and we evaluate. And then also we carry out internal audits to be able to see how the viability of what has been implemented. And then we have the management review. So top management always has to review the ISMS, and this has to be done periodically. Then also clause 10, which is the last clause, is about improvement. So continual improvement, that means the organization has to continually improve, its suitability and adequacy and the effectiveness of the ISMS. You need to make sure per time that what is running is suitable, it is adequate, and is effective. And then you have what we call the non-conformity and corrective action. So you identify the non-conformities, and then you prescribe or you recommend corrective actions to those non-conformities. Now we have what we call, after the clauses, they are called Annex A controls. So basically, what is a control? So it's just a measure that will help you maintain or to modify risk. So in the new version, we have 93 controls. There are 11 new controls. So we have them in categories or things, as you want to call them. We have the people controls, A5. We have the physical controls, A6. And then we have the technological controls. And then we have organizational controls too. So basically, what are the 5 attributes, of these controls? So the controls are either preventive, detective, or corrective, and then they have the information security properties around them, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And then now there's the cybersecurity concept of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then also we have operational capabilities and then security domain. So this is an overview of the 93 controls. In the organizational controls, we have 37 controls. So things like policies for information security, classification of information, access rights, all of that, they're organizational controls. We have the people controls. When you employ people, they must be screened. The terms and conditions for their employment must be clearly stated. Now, there would be the disciplinary process if certain things are contravened. Imagine they let valuable information go out, and there should be punishment for that, in quotes. And then how do you report information security events? Then we have physical controls. So physical controls are around things like physical entry, protecting against physical environmental threats. Also things like cabling security, and all of that. Is your cabling done properly, and all of that. Then we have number A8, Annex A8, which is technological controls. So we have the technological controls, and that is, of course, as you can see, speaks to things like your firewalls, talking about logs, talking about your network security, security of devices, segregation of networks, and all of that. So what are some things that you need to know about the ISMS? So the requirements set in ISO 27001, even though they are generic, they are flexible, and they are useful to all types of organizations. So the good part about it is, beyond these 93 controls, if you want to customize, add other controls, you are free to. It doesn't mean that you use these 93 controls and these 93 controls alone. However, it doesn't mean that all the 93 controls would even be at play. So that is why we have what we call the statement of applicability. It shows you the applicable controls with justifications, and then it will identify the non-applicable controls also with justifications. I'll give an instance. You are talking about securing the physical perimeter. However, I'm a fully remote company. That cannot apply to a company like that. So the justification would be that there's no physical workspace. So there's no physical workspace to secure. And then the ISMS focuses on interested parties, their needs and expectations. So you're not doing it for yourself. There are people, there are interested parties from your staff to your investors, to your customers, to regulators. And then it uses a risk-based approach. That is why we would always do the risk assessment. And then the ISMS is about processes and continual improvement. There's something called the law of process and flow. Where there's a process, there will be flow. So ISMS is not built for chaos, rather it's built to solve chaos. And then processes are more important than policies and other documents. So you have to start collecting records or evidence right now. So if your process is in place, what is the use of a policy when you don't even have a proper process to enforce that policy? And then don't focus on certification in the beginning. You have to implement the process first. So a lot of times I see, even when people come to us for implementations for their organizations, they just want to get the certification. But we always tell them that you have to understand and then implement and then run this program properly, even beyond certification. And then implementing an ISMS can be a complicated project sometimes. So that is why you need to do it systematically and properly. So what are the first steps in implementing an ISMS? You first of all discuss with top management, your IT and information security teams too. Then you download or you purchase the ISO 27001 standard and the ISO 27002, which helps us in understanding how to implement the control. Then you take relevant courses, some of which we do at Mitigate It Academy. And then also you establish an information security committee, and then you conduct a gap analysis. Why do you conduct a gap analysis? It helps you to know where you are and the gaps between where you are and where you need to be. So thank you very much.